When I look at the careers discussion forums, one of the types of careers that comes up repeatedly is data science. What is it that makes this career such a hot topic? Why do so many people want to get into it? What even is data science? That's what we're going to talk about in this week's episode. I'm Jeremy Klein, and this is Change Work Life. Hello and welcome to Change Work Life, the podcast that's all about beating the Sunday evening blues and enjoying Mondays again. If you want to know how you can enjoy a more satisfying and fulfilling working life, you're in the right place. It's not often that we talk about specific careers on the podcast, but sometimes there's one which I see talked about so much that I want to find out more. Data science is one such career, so this week we're going to find out a bit more about what data science actually is, what a career in data science can look like, and the threats and opportunities artificial intelligence might present. To introduce us to the world of data science, I'm delighted to be joined by Ciufentes-Goodbody. A former language teacher, Nicholas is currently Chief Data Scientist at WorldQuant University, where, among other things, he finds innovative ways to use data science tools to improve online learning. Nicholas, welcome to the show.
Well, hey, thank you so much, Jeremy. I'm really happy to be here.
Now, I'm guessing a lot of people probably won't have heard of WorldQuant University, so why don't you start by telling us a bit about it?
Absolutely. Thank you for that opportunity. So WorldQuant University is a free online university. We offer two different programs. We have a master's in financial engineering, and we have a certificate program in data science. And the idea of WorldQuant University is that there are talented and hardworking people everywhere, right? There are smart people everywhere, but unfortunately, opportunity is not everywhere. And so how can we leverage online education to open up new opportunities for hardworking learners all over the globe?
And when you say it's a university, I mean, I actually have no idea what it takes for a university in the UK, let alone the US, to be able to call itself a university. So what's its sort of status, if you like, in the US?
Yeah, so to be a university, you first need to register in one of the states with the Department of Education in that state. So we're incorporated in Louisiana. And then also there's a national process of accreditation that you go under with an accreditation body. And we've done that as well. And then you register with the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education, and then you're ready to go. And then they finally give you that EDU website you've been wishing for. So that's what we've done. And so we're a fully accredited online university.
Oh, right. So someone who goes through your process will get, by the end of it, a degree which is equivalent to, a degree from Harvard, Yale, Stanford. Those are the universities I've heard of in the US.
Well, I'm glad that you're putting me in such a good neighborhood with those other universities. I'm very impressed. But yes, if you join our master's in financial engineering, you will get a master's degree, an MSc in financial engineering. And then our certificate program is you get a Credly certificate.
And how are you able to offer this for free, given that my understanding is that US universities charge rather a lot for their programs?
It's true. US, we're a little notorious for that. Although I should say that UK is not far behind. Let's be honest.
That is true.
So what I would say is that we have WorldQuant University, but you also may have heard of WorldQuant, the global hedge fund. So we're a nonprofit venture of WorldQuant, the hedge fund. So that's where our main funding comes, and from our founder, Igor Tuchinski.
And what's the motivation of the hedge fund to set this up?
Well, the motivation of the hedge fund is that's a good question, but basically it's a nonprofit. So the idea is, the motivation is exactly what I said, right? It's like, how can we open up avenues of opportunity to folks, and how can we bring the sort of the quant sciences to places where they haven't been before? So, it's just a nonprofit venture.
Interesting. All right, so let's get into basics. In simple terms, explaining it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, what is data science?
First, I have to say that you look very mature for a 5-year-old, but I'll see if I can do my best. So what is data science? The idea is that So data science is the idea that we are surrounded by more and more data, right? Whether it comes from websites, whether it comes from Internet of Things sensors, whether it comes from survey data. And so what we need is we need people who are capable of being stewards of that data, people who are able to analyze it and manipulate it in ways that provide insight and answers for people who want to use that data to achieve some sort of mission. So whether it's a nonprofit that's trying to analyze sexual harassment data in the Egyptian public transit, or whether it's somebody who wants to maximize their business sales, right? Data science is the practice of using data to answer questions in really all aspects of the private and public sectors.
So who employs data scientists? Who has these sort of like data science departments?
Almost anyone can have a data science department, but you'll find it in universities under sometimes institutional effectiveness. You'll find it data scientists in HR departments where they're trying to analyze worker data. You'll find it in lots of online companies where they're analyzing data from their website, and maybe they're trying to optimize the search on their website, or maybe they're trying to build some sort of predictive model, decide who gets coverage for their auto insurance or not. And so really you'll find us everywhere. Anywhere where somebody has a lot of data and a lot of questions, that's where you'll find us.
Okay, so a friend of mine works for one of the big supermarkets over here, and he explained to me how his job is kind of making sure that they've got on the shelves the stuff which they know they're going to be able to sell, and they might look at seasonal variations or big events or that kind of thing. Is that essentially data science?
So that sort of supply chain work might be a good place for a data scientist. You might also find them seeing let's see here. What else would a data scientist do in a supermarket? You might also find a data scientist working with how to best and most efficiently circulate coupons to customers of a supermarket so that they can more appropriately, we have overstock of a certain item in this particular area. How do we send out coupons to buyers in that area so that we can balance that supply and demand? So yes, that is one instance of how a data scientist might do their job.
So it sounds like pretty much anything where you want to make some kind of an evidence-based decision, then data science is what you need.
I think that's a good way to say it. I think the key word in data scientist is scientist, right? In the sense that we have hypotheses and we are checking them against the data and then drawing conclusions from that rigorous process. Yes.
So someone who is a data scientist, what could a day in the life look like for them?
Usually a data scientist is spending their time drinking coffee waiting for their model to train. That's what we sort of say as our joke. But a data scientist would be doing... So what would a data scientist be doing day to day? Well, the first thing that a data scientist would be doing would be talking to stakeholders, right? So talking to the CEOs, talking to the VPs, talking to people in different parts of the company to figure out what their needs are. So whereas we think of this as a quantitative science, a lot of this is communicative, right? So there's a big communication component. And from there, you might find a data scientist trying to operationalize or trying to take the needs and develop them into questions. So what is a question that we can ask the data that will help you get what you need? From there, you might find them poring over spreadsheets or kind of the Python programming equivalent of spreadsheets. And there you might find them building models, so a predictive model that will tell you who might bounce from your subscriber base from 1 month to the next, or who might be worthy of extending credit to, or who is not a great bet. And so you might have them building these sorts of predictive models. And then finally, they would be circling back to communication. So once you've built that model, once you've done your data analysis, how can you explain what's happening with your analysis to those stakeholders so that they get the insight they need to make a decision to move forward? So that's what you'll see a data scientist doing a lot of talking to people doing a lot of dialoguing with numbers and building things like predictive models to help companies or private organizations get what they need from their data sources.
And are these roles typically done by the same people, or do you have those data scientists who specialize in communicating with the stakeholders, and then those who specialize in the building the models and crunching the numbers?
It really varies a lot. If you're in a small company with one or two data scientists, they'll probably be doing everything. Oftentimes, you'll see data scientists embedded within different units in a company. So there'll be maybe one data scientist for HR, for example. And in that case, they'll pretty much be doing everything. However, there are places where they have larger data science teams working together. And in that case, you will see kind of a division of labor. So, for example, you might have a data analyst who's building a data dashboard. You might have a machine learning engineer who's taking a model and trying to deploy it so that somebody can make API calls on their website to that model. And then you might also have a data, let's see here, a data engineer who's making sure that that model has the actual data that it needs, moving it from one database to another, making sure that it's undergone the right transformations. So you will see some specialization within the data science field, but it can be just as common that somebody's doing a little bit of everything.
And are those terms that you used typically quite well recognized in the industry, or do you really have to check what someone means? So if someone says a data engineer, then someone else might actually interpret that as a data analyst or something like that.
I would say if you're talking about data analyst, data engineer, machine learning engineer, all of those are pretty well understood, although it's always good to ask. Data scientists like to ask questions, so you should definitely ask questions. The one where we're beginning, the one job title where we're seeing it emerge now is AI engineer, and that's a little more amorphous, but generally it's kind of what machine learning engineer does, which is they take large amounts of data, they build models, and they try to deploy them into production environments. So yes, I would say that it's pretty well divided. There's a clear taxonomy throughout the industry.
So what qualifications typically does one need in order to start the journey as a data scientist?
That's a great question. So a data scientist will usually have expertise in 3 areas. They'll have some mathematics training so that they can understand the models that they're working with and they can manipulate those numbers. They'll also have some statistics training so that they can perform statistical tests, so mathematics and statistics. And then lastly, they'll also have some programming chops as well, generally in a programming language called Python, although not exclusively. There will sometimes be a programming language called R. And of course, a data scientist needs data, so they need to be able to get data from databases. So they'll probably know some database languages like SQL. But basically, those are the 3 big ones: math, statistics, and programming. And that's sort of what you need to know a little bit of each of those, kind of enough to be dangerous in each of those fields. You don't need to be a super specialist. And from there, you can jump off into the world of data science. Now, that's not exclusive. For example, you might have, there's a whole branch of data science called natural language processing. So you maybe heard of ChatGPT and those large language models. These are the people who are building those large language models. And they might also have a background in linguistics and computational linguistics. But what I would say, a data scientist described this very well to me. A data scientist is somebody who tries to do something with a computer, gets an error message that they have no idea what it means, and yet they need to fix it by the end of the day. So anyone who's kind of willing to dive in, solve problems, and learn on the fly, that's sort of what you need to be a data scientist.
If anyone who's listening to this hasn't heard of ChatGPT, please do email me and let me know, because I will be astonished if there's anyone at the moment. But
I know we're in a very big hype cycle with ChatGPT.
What sort of level do these skills need to be taken to? So maths, statistics, and programming. I mean, I did all of these up to what we in the UK call A-levels, which is basically up to age 18. And then from that, I went and did a law degree. So what level of qualification can you expect data scientists to need?
Right. So you have A-levels in the UK, or you might have advanced placement or AP in the United States. I would say you need to be a little bit higher than that. You need to have basically taken a couple courses in university and then maybe had a little bit of specialization or hands-on experience in the workforce. So not, I would say, above A-level, but you don't need to have a master's in all of these. So somewhere in that university sweet spot.
Okay, and so not even necessarily an undergraduate which is dedicated to maths or statistics, as long as you've done some of it.
Right, exactly. So speaking from my own case, I went to a liberal arts college, which for folks who haven't heard that term before means you kind of study a little bit of everything. So you're a master of nothing, basically. But I took statistics courses, I took computer science courses. I actually didn't take any math courses. I wish I had now, of course. I was busy taking Spanish courses. But all of that served as a foundation for me when I began my own self-guided learning into moving into being a data scientist.
Are there any particular characteristic traits which you've identified in people which makes them particularly well aligned to working in data science?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the first thing is a willingness to learn. You know, the field of data science is always changing as new techniques emerge. Think of ChatGPT. A couple months ago, none of us had heard of it, and now it's on everyone's lips, right? And so the ability to quickly learn new things and to be excited and to dive into new subjects when you're not sure what's going on is a really important trait. So that's the first one. The second one is communication. A data scientist 99 out of 100 times is working with non-technical stakeholders. And so they always need to bridge that gap between the technical work that the data scientist is doing and the non-technical audience that wants to get value from that data or get value from the tools that the data scientist has in their tool belt. So being able to communicate, gauge your audience, and speak to them in a way that they understand is also really important. And then finally, you need some interest in numbers. You know, looking over might not be a spreadsheet, but looking over numbers, seeing what they have to tell you, and being excited to hack around on a computer and do programming and explore different features in a data set, you know, that should be something that gets you excited because you're going to be doing it a lot. So those would be kind of the three areas that I think a data scientist really needs to excel in: lifelong learning, communication, and being kind of a nerd, basically.
I was going to ask you about the nerd part. I mean, is data science something which is populated by nerds? And I'm conscious that that could mean something to one person and something else to someone else.
Yeah. So this is an excellent question. You know, not that I was not a nerd before I started in data scientist as a data scientist, but I was a different kind of nerd. But one thing that really shocked me when I moved into data science was the amount of board games that data scientists played. I had never been a big board game person, but so just the amount, the level, the correlation between data science and board games should give you a good idea of the level of nerdery in data science. Let me give you another example. In data science, you often have random numbers and random number processes that you need to set a starting point for. And in data science, we always set everything to 42, like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And so the fact that the entire field of data science is basically built around nerd jokes should give you an indication of just how nerdy we are. And you know what? More power to us. The beautiful thing about being a nerd is it's that you have technical, intellectual subjects that are exciting to you, and you're excited to share them with other people. And so, you know, I think being a nerd is a really positive and wonderful thing and a real basis and foundation of being a data scientist, something we should celebrate.
And I think a lot of people are nerdy in their own way. I mean, I think about a barber that I used to go to who just, you could see the way that he used to cut your hair. He had a very sort of precise, particular way of doing it. It was very much, you know, about the technique. And musicians, I mean, you know, you look at rock stars, you know, the greats of the pop world, they're nerds. I mean, they have learned the musician craft. They will understand the technical stuff. They will understand all these, these things about music theory and that kind of stuff. So I reckon if you look a bit more closely, anyone who is high up in their game is a nerd of some description, I reckon.
Definitely. I think there are nerds everywhere, and so we should definitely be celebrating them. And actually, you mentioned musicians. A ton of musicians end up working in data science and programming, specifically because I think there's a little bit of intellectual crossover in the way you need to approach the subjects. So, yeah.
Yeah, I noticed a crossover between musicians and those in the medical profession as well, particularly when I was at university. The number of medical students who'd be involved in music was quite definitely, well, it seemed more than average. I'm sure you'd be able to tell me whether it was statistically significant or not.
I'd need to see the data, but yes, I'd be happy to dive in.
So for someone who is maybe at a career crossroads, who doesn't have what you might call sort of typically nerdy background in terms of what they have done so far, or I'll say, non-technical. Maybe they're, to pick a random example, a lawyer, and they're thinking of a career pivot, and they're thinking, okay, this does sound quite interesting. Where does someone like that even start? I mean, maybe you could share your story. I mean, you went through teaching languages to data science.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would love to share my story, and I think a lot of what happened to me speaks to how you might make this transition in the field in general. So the first thing I would say is oftentimes when you start thinking that you're going to make a pivot, you say, oh no, why didn't I study more statistics at university? And what I would say is, don't give yourself a hard time for the things that you didn't study. Really give yourself credit for the things that you have studied, because they end up being your superpower in a lot of ways. They end up being a differentiator. But to speak for me personally, I started out as a language professor. I spent a lot of time studying Mexican literature, so very deep into the humanities. And what happened is I ended up working in a department of translation studies. Now, translation studies, very big in Europe, not so much in the US, but it's essentially how we translate texts and also the phenomena of how texts are translated. So almost like a sociological study of how things are translated. And then finally, there's a very technical part to the field. So think of machine translation, for example, like Google Translate. And so I was there studying my text on the Mexican Revolution, and I was looking over at the sort of technical computational folks, and I was going, that's pretty interesting. What are you guys doing? Can we have lunch? Can we see what's going on? And so I started being kind of pulled into the technical side of things. And then what happened is I was working abroad, and when I wanted to come back to the US, and I think this is a lot of people's feelings, especially in academia, is that there really wasn't a career path for me in the US. Academic jobs are very hard to come by anywhere. And so it was really getting to the point where I didn't have a lot of the flexibility that I wanted in my career. And so what happened is I ended up getting a job as a university administrator. So I started by doing some self-study. I found an online sort of a self-guided course called Data Camp, and I began working on the courses there. And then what I would do is every time I could think of a reason to do a data science project for my boss, I said, hey, let me convince him. And so I would basically figure out a project where I knew maybe 50% of what I needed to do, and then the other 50% I needed to learn on the fly. And so I began building up a portfolio of data science projects with my boss. And then from there, what happened is I applied to a boot camp. So in the US and actually in the UK as well, we're having an increasing number of boot camps because data science is a new enough field where universities are still a little bit behind the curve in offering graduate degrees. And sometimes you don't need a 2-year graduate degree. Sometimes you just need a 6-month boot camp. And so I ended up taking a boot camp there. And when they looked at my CV, they said, hey, you have a lot of teaching experience. Would you like to stick on afterwards and maybe work with us and be an instructor? And I said, absolutely, I would love to. So I was an instructor there. And this is one of those cases where your previous life can sometimes be a superpower. People have always seen that I have teaching chops. And so that's always often where I find myself doing my data science work, is data science plus teaching. And actually, going back to languages, in data science, you find a lot of physicists, a lot of theoretical physicists, because they also have a hard time getting job. It's hard to be a physicist. I had no idea. But anyways, what I found is that when we were working with the technical subjects, they were much higher than me because they had a much better grasp of the math than I did. But what happened is when we moved to natural language processing and manipulating language using these programming tools, all of a sudden I was a lot higher, a lot further along than they were. And so, again, whatever you bring into your next phase of your career is always something that's going to set you apart and something that you can leverage and use as a foundation to make you special, let's say. And so what happened is once I stayed on as an instructor there, I worked there for several years. I then moved to another boot camp, and then I moved to WorldQuant University. And again, we have our data science certificate program that I built. It's self-guided. And so for people who are wondering how to pivot, it's a really great place to start. We go through 8 projects. They are end-to-end data science projects. You go all the way from data acquisition to building a communication piece. You travel all around the world from figuring out how buildings are going to be damaged in the Nepal earthquake to figuring out volatility on the Bombay Stock Exchange. So I'm getting a little off topic here. But the point is that along my transition path, I started with self-learning. So self-guided courses, and there are lots of free resources out there. I then moved to a boot camp, which gave me a small intensive practice. And all along the way, I was figuring out ways to apply the things that I was learning in my job so that I could build my resume or build my project portfolio to help me get that next job as I was moving along in the process. So that's how I made my own transition.
Okay, so say I was interested in a transition. So as I mentioned, I did maths, which included an element of statistics and computing up to age 18, then did a law degree. And for the past 20-ish years, I've been a lawyer. And having the maths background is actually quite useful because it means I'm a lawyer that can count, which is a minority I've found out, and computing.
This is another example where, your past life ends up being your superpower.
So someone in my position, where do I start? I mean, what do I need on my resume to start getting past the sort of like the first gate when it comes to getting jobs?
So that first gate when it comes to getting jobs, what you would need some evidence of your ability to work with numbers. When it comes to kind of the data science continuum of jobs, the entry point for many people is often a data analyst role. And in that role, you're looking at spreadsheets of numbers and you're often creating visualizations or dashboards. So any evidence that you can do that is what you need. So what I would do is I would start by finding data sets that are of interest to you. You can go to places like Kaggle.com or openafrica.net, find data sources that are interesting to you and begin exploring them, either using a spreadsheet or beginning to learn how to work in programming like Pandas, a programming language like Python and Pandas. And I would begin building a portfolio where you do data analyses of numbers. And so then when it comes to applying to a job, the first section of your job isn't your work experience, but it's your portfolio. So maybe somebody can click through, go to a website, see the different work that you've done, and that would be a good way to get your foot in the door.
How would I learn how to do this? How would I look at stats on Africa and then decide to do some kind of analysis in a spreadsheet when, I don't know much about how to use spreadsheets?
Right. So the first thing is you should come to my course and come to my boot camp. That's the way we would do it. But I would say that ours is one of many offerings. So looking around on places like Coursera or Udemy or just Googling data science courses, you'll find lots of free and paid resources that will start bringing you into that fold, that will start teaching you how to do data wrangling with Python, for example. And so what I would do is I would take those things that you're learning through these free courses, and I would then try to apply them to a data set that's interesting to you. Basically, I would say that The data science community is one that's very much based in open source thinking, and there's a lot of open resources and lots of sharing in the community. And so you can just kind of get interested in that conversation, maybe find a data science meetup near to you that you could join. And so it's by hooking into the community and those resources that I would think would be your first step to becoming a data scientist.
When it comes to your resume, do employers look only at your portfolio to see what you can do, or do they also look at what sort of a boot camp you did, where you did it? Is that relevant for when you choose what to do?
I wouldn't say that the name of the boot camp is particularly important in the same way that sometimes the name of the university is, but I think it's more important that you've done it at all. So I think your portfolio would be the first thing. And then the second thing that I might do is I might look through a bunch of data analyst jobs or data scientist jobs, see what the keywords are in those ads, and see what it is that you've done in your previous life that you can maybe shoehorn into a description that uses those keywords. So a little bit of rewriting your work autobiography so that it reflects the needs of the employer. So if you kind of rewrite the work that you've done and then you add that portfolio, it's not so much the boot camp that's going to matter, but the fact that you have somewhat of the experience and the fact that you can actually show that you have built these data science projects or products.
So which boot camp you did might not matter in terms of your resume, but presumably you do want to pick one where they know what they're talking about and they're going to teach you well. So do you have any tips for filtering out the bad ones and narrowing down the good ones?
Yes, definitely. So one way to find a good boot camp is often, let's think about this here for a second. So what's a good way to find a good boot camp? Well, one, you want a boot camp that approaches you in a professional manner. So one that has an admissions office, one that can speak to you about what the curriculum is, one that maybe has a component of helping you find a job and getting your resume up into shape. So something that looks at your entire transition process and doesn't just give you a little bit of theoretical foundation. The second thing I would look for is I would look for a boot camp that was hands-on. So one in which you were going to be creating projects, one in which you might have a capstone project. So not one that's going to be theoretical, but one in which you're going to have your hands on your keyboard. And then the last thing that I would look for is I would look for one that the things that they teach in their curriculum fit into the areas in which you need a little bit more practice. So if you haven't been working in maths in quite some time, you might want to find one that has a little bit more math in it, for example. So that's what I would look for. I would look for one which seems professional in the sense that they can explain what it is they're doing. I'd look for one in which they were going to be working with you in the whole career transition, so not just learning, but also getting your resume ready. I would look for one that's hands-on, that gives you portfolio pieces. Those are the main things that I would look for if I was looking for a boot camp.
Do any of them have like minimum entry requirements, or will the good ones work with you to figure out where, as you said, where you might need the help if you're, interested but have had no previous education that might be maths or statistics or computer related?
Well, certainly you want a boot camp that has some sort of admissions threshold, because if they're just letting anyone in, then it's possible that they don't really have a clear vision of what it is that they want to teach or what it is, the level that they can bring people in and the level that they can bring them out. So your question is, actually repeat your question and let me see if I can answer it again in a better way.
I'm thinking about the person who maybe has virtually no background other than maybe what they had to do at school in maths or statistics or computing, and that person wants to find a boot camp that suits them. Do they need to do anything, if you like, to get to first base? So to get that knowledge in terms of like, minimum entry requirements, or can they find something where, I don't know, the bootcamp might just check that they've got the right sort of attitude and aptitude, but otherwise will provide all the tools they need, even if it's starting from that very low base?
Generally, what happens is if you come into a boot camp and they see that you don't have the kind of lore knowledge that you need, what they'll do is they'll suggest a series of resources to you, whether it's a free online course from MIT or whether it's a paid course from somebody like a Data Camp or a Udemy, to kind of get you up to that baseline first. So, for example, what we do is we have an entrance exam, and for students who don't pass that entrance exam, we can in a customized way, tell them where they need to bulk up their learning before they come back and become part of the program. So what I would say is if you're at kind of an absolute zero on all three of those areas, I might reach out to a boot camp and see what resources they recommend that you study on first before coming back and then being able to kind of hit the road running.
An objection which I always see to the idea of changing career generally is going back down to the bottom rung of the ladder and starting on a much lower pay, especially if you're in a career and you've been in it 20 years and you've got up to a level of seniority. So you said that you might start by building together your portfolio, and then you'd be typically going for this sort of entry level data analyst role. So the person who's concerned about going back to the bottom rung of the ladder and taking a pay cut in doing that, I mean, what advice do you have for them?
Well, I would say that unless you're a high-powered doctor or lawyer or something, generally moving into the data science professions is well paid. And so while you might be taking a little dip initially, you might even be starting where you left off in terms of pay. So I would say that this is not so much of an issue. But the other thing I would say is that you need to balance what you want in your career when it comes to finding a job that's fulfilling and finding one that pays the bills. Sometimes a job that pays a lot is a job that isn't one that you find particularly fulfilling or one that you're interested to go to on Monday morning. Right? We talk about getting rid of those Monday morning blues. And so I would say that that's just something you need to balance. And the other thing I would say is that because there's such a demand for data science, often when you start at the bottom in some careers, you're thinking it's going to be a 5 or 10-year ramp up before I get back to a senior position. But in data science, it's much more accelerated. So we were talking about a 1, 2, 3-year ramp up to get back to a senior position. So what I would say is generally the salaries in data science are good. Generally moving up can happen pretty quickly. And lastly, if you're already thinking about moving to another job because where you're at isn't where you want to be, then maybe it's okay to take a pay cut as you kind of work into that new career.
If you've got this potential 1, 2, 3-year progression, what does progression look like after that? Is there progression, or is this something which plateaus out fairly early on?
I don't know if it plateaus out fairly early on. Generally, you'll work as maybe a data analyst, and then you might work up to a senior analyst position, or you might move over to data science and then a senior data scientist. Generally, those are the two levels, scientist and senior. And from there, you might move into management. You might be a manager of data science. You might be a lead data scientist and overseeing a whole section of data science. But I wouldn't say there's so much of a plateau, only because the profession is always changing. Right? So if you're a senior data scientist, it doesn't mean that you're sitting on your laurels. It means that every 2 to 3 years, you need to be learning new ways of doing things because the tools have completely changed. And so while your job title might not change, everything is always changing around you. So it's definitely never boring in terms of a plateau. No.
That leads very nicely on to my next question, which we've already touched on, and that's the role of AI. I mean, there's so much talk about how AI is basically going to replace a lot of functions in jobs. And it seems to me, as someone who admittedly doesn't really know very much about it, that any profession which involves taking huge amounts of data and crunching those numbers, this could be something which AI could substitute the sort of work that people are doing. So I'd love to hear from you what your take is on what the threats are from AI, but also what the opportunities might be.
Well, I think, data scientists, as the people who are designing and training those models, are in a very unique position, not only because they are making the models, but also because they are on the leading edge of, we talk about how we treat each other in society. Well, data scientists are the ones who are thinking through how we treat each other algorithmically in society. And so I think it's a very exciting time to be a data scientist. The question is, how is AI going to change our jobs? Well, you can right now, you can think of AI as being able to do many tasks at kind of a C or C plus level. Does that work in UK grading? Does that make
absolutely,
sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Just making sure. Right? So any kind of like mediocre text. And so where I've found it very helpful is in writing small snippets of code. And AI generally will help you train models a little bit quicker in determining what type of model you want to train. But I don't see the profession of data science being under threat only because there's somebody who needs to be asking questions as to what, right? Maybe the process of building the model has become more automated, but why you're building the model, the parameters of that model, making sure that it's being deployed ethically, those are things that data scientists will always need to do. So while we don't know what the future brings, I would say that data scientists are in a unique position not only to determine the future of how AI is used in our societies, that data scientists are in the unique position of determining how those models are built. And so AI isn't coming for your job. You're the person who's figuring out what it is that AI will be doing in its job.
What haven't I asked you that people should know about working in data science?
I think you've covered everything, but there's one thing that I think bears repeating, which is really the idea of lifelong learning. Data science is always changing. There are always new techniques. There are always new technologies. And so one thing that you really need as a data scientist is a willingness to learn and learn new things, whether it's studying on your own, whether it's working in informal groups, or whether it's working in a boot camp like the WorldQuant Applied Data Science Lab. So if that's something that is interesting to you, you always want to come to job with your learning hat on, then I think data science is a career to investigate.
And for someone for whom this has piqued their interest, do you have any recommended resources, podcasts, books, blogs, sources of information that people can maybe take a look at?
There's one resource which, let's see here, what would be a good start? So I think there are a couple resources, a couple books that I think are very good. So one, which would be a good start to statistics, would be Introduction to Statistical Learning by Gareth James. Another would be for machine learning and different types of data science would be Hands-on Machine Learning with Scikit-Learn, Keras, and TensorFlow by Aurélien Geron. And a book that I love in terms of kind of a deep dive into Python would be Fluent Python by, what is the name? Luciano Romaglio. So those are some resources that I would recommend. You can see that I'm very book heavy, but that's just kind of like I'm still a professor at heart. Another book which I would recommend, as long as we're recommending books, but one that I think cuts to the heart of what learning should be and what learning in the quantitative sciences can be, would be Mathematics for Human Flourishing by Francis Su, where Professor Su talks about the process of learning and teaching math and how math can teach you about everything from democracy to beauty. Right? And so it's a really great way to see how what you think might be a closed off subject actually reaches into many important corners of our lives.
Excellent. Well, there'll be plenty of material for the show notes for this episode. On which subject, if someone wants to get hold of you or find out more about WorldQuant University, where would you like them to go?
Absolutely. So first of all, I am always excited to talk to people who are in career transitions. It's a passion of mine as someone who's also been through the fire, helping other folks as well. So if you want to reach out, I encourage you to do so. You can find me on LinkedIn at NC-Goodbody, or just look for Nicholas Ciufentes-Goodbody. That's always where you'll find me on LinkedIn, and you can reach out there. And then if you're interested in learning data science, I really recommend our Applied Data Science Lab at WorldQuant University. And you can go to wqu.edu and then just search for, it'll go under our offerings, and then you'll see the Applied Data Science Lab. So you can reach me at NC-Goodbody on LinkedIn, or come to wqu.edu.
Brilliant. And I will put links to those in the show notes as well. Nicholas, thank you so much for coming on, for sharing your story, and for introducing us to the fascinating world of data science.
So, Jeremy, I want to thank you. It's such a delight to talk to your audience. And one of the great joys in my life is talking to people about data science, both as a profession and both as a field, but then as a profession and transitioning into that profession. So thank you again. It's been a real pleasure for me.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that interview with Nicholas Ciufentes-Goodbody of WorldQuant University. I didn't really know much about data science as an area before this conversation, and what struck me was just how many areas this career could apply to. Any industry where decisions are made based on data is going to require some kind of data science function. And when you stop and think about it, that could apply to almost any industry. And there's that theme again about how your previous career can actually be your superpower rather than something which holds you back. All those experiences, all those connections, everything you learnt in your previous career, you can take forward. It's going to be useful. This doesn't just apply to data science, but this applies pretty much to any career you can think of. It's something I've said before, it's probably something I'll say again, but it really is a really very important message. As always, you'll find a transcript, a summary of all we talked about, and links to any resources that Nicholas mentioned, and they're in the show notes page for this episode at changeworldlife.com/179. That's changeworldlife.com/179. Something I'd like to know from you is whether this type of episode is helpful. Whereas normally we look at themes which apply pretty much to all careers, is it helpful to dive into particular careers, particular industries? If you'd like me to do more episodes like this, and if there are industries or careers which you'd particularly like me to cover, then do get in touch on the website at changeworldlife.com/contact. That's changeworldlife.com/contact. There's a form there where you can send me a message. I read all of them, so do get in touch that way. There's another great episode coming up in 2 weeks' time, so if you haven't subscribed to the show, what are you waiting for? Make sure you do it so you never miss an episode, and I can't wait to see you in 2 weeks' time. Cheers!